All right, we're going to get started. Thanks everyone for coming. Once again, my name is Robert Ose. I'm the director of the Council of Sustainable Leaders. We've been working paired with the Sustainability Institute to put on sustainability showcases every Friday for the entire semester, where we bring in different faculty across campus to talk about their work and how it was sustainability in an effort to create a broader conversation about sustainability as a whole in the state. So we're going to do a brief introduction about Dr. Esther Obonyo. Dr. Obonyo is a professor of engineering design and architectural engineering and was recently named the director of the Humanitarian Engineering.
No, that's an old profile, sorry.
Sorry about that. Well, she's a faculty member at the College of Engineering who specializes in translational research and reverse translation, essentially trying to take research strategies that move ideas from basic research to real-world application. She's worked on some major projects, such as the National Science Foundation International Research Experiences for Students program, in an effort to educate the next generation of globally engaged engineers and scientists. She's a very active member of the College of Engineering faculty, and we're very excited to have her here today. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Obonyo.
I have to click on. Good afternoon. Does it work? Yeah, I didn't think I can project my voice far back, but thank you for coming. As you heard, my name is Esther Obonyo. I will try to tell my story, which includes some highlights of some of my experiences. Obviously, we have a limited amount of time, so I'll just give you some highlights. And if you're interested in any specific topic or project or program that I'm involved in, you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to sit down with you and talk more extensively. So I'm actually in two departments, as he said. I'm in architectural engineering design and architectural engineering, and I'm also in the global programs right now, working with Professor Deumi and and Rob also. And I'm happy to see some of the people from the 3 units here, including my department chair from engineering design. And I'll actually start with a slide that has something to do with him. In 2014, when I came, was it 2014 or 2015? 2015, when I came for my interview for my job at Penn State, I was sitting outside my department chair's office, and I was waiting for a meeting with him, and he gave me some magazines to read. He was like, you can read those. And one of them was the Chronicles of Higher Education. And the very first page that I opened talked about professors as brick makers. So I panicked for a moment, because one of the areas that I work in is about bricks. And at the University of Florida, where I was for 10 years, they used to call me the brick lady, because some of the building-related research we used to do was being done outside so people could see that. So I was like, what is this? You know, has Sven seen this article? Am I in trouble? Yeah, but I wasn't, because what the person was really doing, he was referring to an article that was published in 1963, where Thomas Fosher was talking about the problem that we have people who are working in a research setting, especially within a university. So quoting some of the words that were in the article, they're saying that brick making had become an end in itself. So he was talking about research. Science generating knowledge had become an end in itself. So his metaphor is still very relevant even up to this particular point. So in his letter, this is way back in 1963, he lamented that academic scholarship had become fixated on generating lots of pieces of knowledge, bricks, and was far less concerned with putting them together into a cohesive whole. So after I read the article, I felt pretty confident. I can use this in my discussion and my presentation for my interview at Penn State, and it worked. Yeah, so this is a modern example of showing that things which we are doing are still very relevant. What I work on contributes largely to number 9, innovation and infrastructure, and number 11, sustainable cities and communities. So I call myself Nairobi Girl because I was born in Nairobi and I grew up in Nairobi. I went to University of Nairobi. And the interest in infrastructure is both from new buildings, new structures perspective, but also the older structures, because we realize we do not have money to replace everything. some of the demand that exists, some of the needs will have to be addressed through focusing on what we already have and trying to find ways of extending the life of whatever it is that we're dealing with. So one of the analogies that I like, which captures this very well, when we look at things like deterioration, we analogize it to going to see a doctor, that at different stages in your life, they tell you that, this is what we expect to have happened, and then they go about doing this diagnosis where they're falsifying the assumptions. So it's a similar thing with the buildings or, a section of a bridge, falsifying assumptions. Yeah, so very interesting stuff, very interesting work that's being done, not just by me, but several people working in that area. So this captures everything that I've done for the past 12 years. Yeah, there are two buckets. One bucket focusing on affordable, sustainable, resilient structural materials. We're looking at it, the groups that I work with, plural. They look at the science, the engineering education. We also look at the societal applications. Does this work in a real world setting? And there's a reason why we focus on this, and there's a reason why I am interested in this. First of all, I like to work with my hands. When I'm working with my students, we talk for a bit and then I tell them, get your hands dirty, do something. Because sometimes the best way to learn is by failing, and you fail by trying to do something. So I like materials for that. Secondly, materials, building materials specifically, they contribute significantly to economic development in any part of the world. They also contribute significantly to greenhouse gases, especially concrete and cement-like products. So those are things which my collaborator and I have tried to hone in on, just looking at, concrete. If not concrete, what else could we use? Yeah, or option B, looking at ways of minimizing the use of cement, a material which on its own accounts for 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. Or looking at things like bricks, yeah? So I do bricks, I look at bricks that are not fired, but I'm also looking at bricks that are fired, because in the low-income countries, that's the hugest bucket of building materials that is available, especially in places like Kenya, Tanzania. They're going to be firing bricks. And some of the materials that we're looking at have certain applications, but they don't scale very well. I also look at knowledge management, which I use as a bucket to capture everything related to data mining, intelligence systems, but we also look at my collaborators and I are also interested in tacit knowledge. There's knowledge that cannot be codified. How do you incorporate that into the design process? So my journey with the materials actually started with a trip. I was taking my students to Tanzania. Initially, I was taking them to Kenya, and then there was a travel advisory, and I said, hey, if you give me permission, we had some money from the NSF, I will take them to Tanzania, yeah? Those countries are pretty much neighbors, and the boundary, that's a colonial creation, yeah? And I put together a very strong pitch. Everybody bought it, they loved it. So we went to Tanzania, and I will share some of the experiences in subsequent slides as we go along, but one good thing that came out of this, it birthed several other subsequent grants. Some of them focusing on the East African context, some of them focusing on applications in the US. So I'll highlight some of them. So first of all, we wanted to be very clear that what we are doing has got scientific research embedded in it. Yeah, this was not, I like the way one of my collaborators said, we are not working for Catholic Relief Services. Yeah, nothing wrong with what they're doing, but we were very clear in our mind that science was there. Basic science was a big part of what we're looking at. So I've talked about deterioration already, that like human beings, as we age, things begin to fall apart. Yeah, my optician tells me that, at 35, it's downhill all the way, so we can question that. Yeah, but similar to buildings, at a certain points, we expect things to start falling apart, but then we also know that there's residual capacity that we can unlock. Yeah, some of the other things that we look at, my collaborators and I focus on moisture dynamics. Yeah, so these are things which, as I said, it started from me spending 2 months, actually close to 3 months in Tanzania, and I spent a lot of time looking at the buildings, just studying what is going on here. The type of construction that I was expecting to find in Dar es Salaam was not there. Dar es Salaam is along the coast of East Africa, so one of the things that I put on the table when I was moving or shifting from Kenya to Tanzania was the fact that this is similar, and there's a lot of lessons that can be we learned from this Swahili architecture, design and construction technique, which has been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the structures are still standing, but they were not there in Tanzania. So I started looking at what they were using and trying to understand what is working well, what is not working well, what is making them still gravitate back to concrete. Yeah, and this was some of the problems, yeah, the moisture damage. And we studied that, yeah, in a laboratory at the University of Florida. And then, you know, coming back to the US, yeah, I was in Florida. So it was very important to my collaborators and I to show that we are closing the loop here. Something that's starting in Tanzania can come back, the knowledge can come back to the US, and we can apply it to some of the issues that are related to, I don't think this is working. Is it? Yes. So some of the issues that are related to popularizing the use of sustainable structural building materials. So for the US application, the first barrier obviously was skepticism for from people who are in the sector, because they had doubts that what we were proposing could satisfy the requirements of the building code. So we thought, let's make it very hard. Hurricane resistance in Florida, yeah? Let's show that if this thing is designed properly, if the process is correct, yeah, if you choose the input materials, the stabilizers with a very good understanding of the soil characteristics, yeah, we went down to the, you know, doing a microstructural analysis of the soil. We were trying to show that if you choose things like fibers for reinforcement, yeah, if you do it correctly, you can satisfy the requirements of Florida building code. And we had a process that was based on American standards and building codes. And we had results, yeah? So the reason why part of this was very significant, people have attempted to use this, but there is also concerns that different studies report different findings, and our hypothesis was that it's because they are not taking a holistic approach. They are looking at just one thing. They are focusing on, say, just the fiber, or just the soil, or just the process of mixing the two together, the machine, etc. So we were approaching it a little more holistically. In our humble opinion, we had 3 teams in 3 different universities looking at it, and we were pretty confident with that our results show that this can be applied in the US. Yeah, and so in this slide, I wanted to just show that with the fiber, what my student Peter, my doctoral student Peter, who spent a lot of time working on this, what he was able to show that some of the concerns related to the use of the fiber can be attributed to the texture of the fiber. Yeah, and he came up with, you know, a way of using this particular fiber, which is fibrillated, which shows that the texture of the fiber is contributing to it increasing the ability of the matrix to withstand cracking when it's fractured. So he demonstrated this through doing the analysis at the microstructure level. So in summary, the 10 years that I was trying to capture here can be summarized in these: new materials, or not, if it's not new material, new use of a material, are unproven by definition. Like most experiments, they tend to fail. So I was in class with my students yesterday and trying to explain to them that failure sometimes is a good thing. And that was a little bit challenging, but they got it. So like most experiments, they tend to fail. If the experiment is the whole exterior of the building, they will fail big. So the recommendation my collaborators and I have, there is value in continuing to look at building material issues, yeah, at the small scale, yeah, small scale experimentation, and, you know, generating empirical data, because some of the skepticism that is in the industry right now is still impeding the large scale application of these sustainable structural materials in construction. So at that point, you know, 2012, I was pretty confident that the team that I was working with had a handle on how to adopt a system approach for issues related to sustainable building materials that have got structural load-bearing capacity. Yeah, so we decided we are ready. We are going big with this. We are translating this into a big project with 150 people distributed across several countries in the US, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia. We were excited. Yeah, we felt we had the dream team. We speak the same language. We're on the same page about everything. We put in a proposal for a sustainability research network. We went through round 1. Yeah, excellent reviews. We were very excited. We were like, we're getting this thing. Yeah, we went for the second round, full proposal. We got shortlisted again. I think they shortlisted 7 teams, so we were shortlisted. So we could taste success. We were that close. Yeah, so we went for the reverse visit, and I was one of the 3 people who went for the reverse visit. We were confident, we were prepared to answer all the questions that they could ask us. Yeah, and the conversation lasted about an hour and a half, and it went really well until the last 15 minutes. One person asked a question that we could not answer. Yeah, so they told us, you have a big team, you have people from all these different disciplines, and then he asked us, what would happen if the engineers decided to vote off the social scientists from the island, or if the social scientists just decided, we're picking our bags and going, what's going to fall apart? We could not answer that question. We tried, but we really could not answer that question, because the reality was, yeah, even if they left the island, we would have found ways of salvaging this project. Yeah, and for that reason, we didn't get the award. Yeah, so it was initially very disappointing. It was like going to the Olympics and finishing 4th. Yeah, but after I got over the initial disappointment, I was like, hey, by the way, wait. You finished 4th, the team. The team finished 4th in the Olympics. That's huge. Yeah. So I started looking at that problem, like, why could we not answer this question? I thought I was doing everything I was doing from a cross-disciplinary perspective. So I decided, this is a good time for me to step away for a moment from the group that I typically work with and start having conversations with other people. So maybe then I'll have an understanding of problem definition in a way that sticks, like with respect to, we need all these people because they are critical members of the team, and if they leave, our project is going to fall apart. So, before I started going off on a journey, the other thing that I reflected on after, accepting our position as number 4 in the Olympics was maybe our problem was not big enough. Yeah. Because, a lot of the questions that this last person was asking, they were suggesting that he did not think we had a big enough problem. So I was like, okay, we'll find a big definition of a big problem. Yeah, the World Economic Forum captures it so nicely. Yeah, all these issues that we're dealing with from all the different perspectives, they are interconnected. They are critical interdependencies that we cannot rule out. Yeah, so I thought, okay, good. Now I have a reason to go have conversations with different people based on how they built environment interfaces with what they're doing. Yeah, so again, related to the big problem, yeah, I stepped back and said, how big is this problem? Very big, yeah. In the US alone, I like this quote, so I'll just read it. Yeah, the real issue is not that there's less affordable housing today for the poor than there used to be. There is many more to speak of. So this is, we're shooting the ball, but the goal keeps moving. Yeah, so whatever we're doing is not going to work very well because, first of all, the demand is huge and the demand is not static. Yeah, so I was like, okay, there's a good reason to talk to a social scientist. I don't know how to do that. I know how to make bricks and crush them. I know how to integrate them into a wall and crush the wall. Yeah, but I don't know how to kick balls when the goal keeps shifting. I don't know how to do that. Yeah, and then again, I stepped back again and said, is the problem complicated enough? And then the answer is yes. That's my friend John. I spent some time with him working on a project, hospital expansion project. They had just been elevated from a regional hospital to a trauma center, so that was huge. In North Florida region, University of Florida had the only trauma center for so many years or so many decades. So for a smaller hospital to be elevated to the same status as the University of Florida Shands, that's huge. And they put in a lot of money in the project. They're like, let's make this big. We want a helicopter landing pad, everything. Yeah. So this was a very interesting project. I went there, to look at, what do they deal with from a risk management perspective. And the entire time I spent there, John graduated from our program at the University of Florida before I joined the University of Florida, obviously, but he decided instead of working in a company in the office, he wants to be out on the job site. The entire time that I was there working with him, he spent more time putting out fires than doing anything else. In fact, he was so stressed out that every day at about 3 o'clock, he would go outside and run very fast for 1 hour. Yeah. So I can talk extensively about that, but I was very excited once more. I have an answer. This is a complex problem. Not everything can be solved using quantitative methods. Yeah. Then I stepped back again and started thinking about how my journey as a researcher began. Yeah. I was in an industry-based PhD in England, and when I say industry-based, I don't mean a company was paying for my research. I mean a company was paying for my research, and I was physically located inside the company, and they had a direct influence on what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. So sometimes some of the early discussions were revolving around the thing like, we have a concern. Yeah. You're going to disappear for 3 months and then come back, and we don't like what you're showing on the table. How about you put something on the table every single week? Yeah. And my advisor and I would have to, not just for me, but for all the students who are in the program, would need to explain to them that we cannot have deliverables for every single week. Yeah, so we were negotiating. So I was using that as an example, that they were driving this thing, and a lot of what we had to do was negotiating with them. I had a product out of that they were satisfied and happy with. Upon graduation, I went to work for a big multinational company in the business improvement department, which also led me into a business improvement network for the Southeast Asia. There were Southeast England. There were lots of valuable lessons I learned about business-driven R&D. I can talk extensively about that, but I will not do that today. And then more recently, just before I came to the university, before I came to Penn State University, I had a joint appointment with the business school. And again, the idea was, how can I make what the research that my collaborators and I are focusing on part of a bigger conversation. So I said, business school, they're smart. Yeah, they know how to scale things. They know how to operate millions and millions of dollars of budgets. I'll go work with them. Valuable experience. Yeah, those were the people who were in the same cohort with me, plus the leader of the program, Michael, who's closest to us. I can talk extensively about that experience. Yeah, but this slide summarizes one of the biggest takeaways for me. Yeah, the things that we are trying to do require patient capital. We knew that already. It was just nice to have a term for it. Yeah, patient capital. You're not going to get immediate profits, return on your investment. Yeah, and there are people who are willing to wait. Yeah, all they care about, in the last line there, they want proof that the underlying enterprise can grow in a sustainable manner in the long run. So I walked away from this experience mostly because I changed jobs. I walked away from it very confident that an entrepreneurial approach can contribute to the questions that we want to answer, and because again, we are trying to make a case, why collaborate with people who are outside of your domain? So I have an answer. And then the other thing, a big takeaway from this was, at no point, I was part of a business improvement network in New York City as well for 9 months. At no point did anybody suggest that the problems that we are dealing with can be solved 100% through relying on a market-based approach. Yeah, they acknowledged they were part of the solution, but not the whole solution. And then this was another example. It sort of overlapped with the business, but had a think tank component to it. I was, and I'm still a member of this initiative. It's a think tank, environmental think tank based in DC, Environmental Leadership Program. I'm a senior fellow. I was able to test some of the ideas that we had, my collaborators and I had for the hazard mitigation. We are saying we can look at the building material issues at a single building level, but this is not going to really work very well unless we scale up and we see what's going to happen to a neighborhood area. Yeah, or looking at a much bigger picture, working with urban planners and understanding, from an urban policy perspective, how can they contribute to this equation? So again, I could not do that alone. I relied on this environmental leadership program. Then this is another example also. So I have a funny story here. When I was in New York for 10 months, and I remember when I was actually about to fly out, I must have been going to Mexico, I saw an opportunity to apply to become a visiting professor. And it sounded interesting. It said, field dev, apply. So I was like, okay, I'll apply, because it was aligned very nicely with the things I was beginning to do at that particular point in 2014. And I forgot about it. I came back from Mexico and I got a letter, an email in my inbox saying, congratulations, pack your bags, we need to fly you to Manila. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I thought field dev was Philadelphia. So I'm like, it's the beginning of the semester. I have a class starting next week. I cannot go to Manila right now. Yeah, but it made me stop and start looking at any information that I could find related to this program. Like, the application form did not say this. I'm sure it was there somewhere in a small note somewhere, but I didn't see it. Yeah, so I started now to get really interested in learning more about this program. And the more I learned, the more excited I got. This was an initiative that was very large scale, and it was being driven 100% by a small group of Filipinos based in the Silicon Valley, most of them trained as engineers. Yeah, I think a couple of them went to Stanford for their MBAs. The other two were engineers. They'd worked in industry. You know, a couple of them were in their 70s, almost retiring, they had startup companies. They had tried pretty much everything. And they just decided, we are going to start a revolution in Philadelphia, and we are going huge with this. Yeah, so that was it. Yeah, so their theory of change, I'm using their words, it was based on a three-pronged strategy. Number one, building the capacity of the science technology programs and technology programs. In short, they were saying, if we are going to go big with this thing, we are talking about making change at the national level, we need partnerships with the universities in the Philippines. Yeah, so first of all, they had to work with them, identify where the weaknesses are, and then help them to address those weaknesses. I was actually part of a program that that fed directly into that. Number two, pretty much creating a supportive, a conducive business environment. They were in the Silicon Valley, they had their network, they tapped into business school networks. That's how I ended up getting the email, because of University of Florida, my involvement with activities at the University of Florida. So they were not just focusing on Stanford, the Silicon Valley. They were saying, who do you know? Yeah, can you link us to them? So 1 + 1 became like 1,000 instead of 1 + 1 = 2, because when they come after you, they come after your network as well. Yeah, when I was at the University of Florida, they were asking me, bring more people. Yeah, and when I told them I'm moving to Penn State, they told me, we want someone from Penn State other than you, like somebody else. Yeah, so that was their business model. They were saying, if you're going to do this and do it right, we need all the help we can get. And then the final one, they were also addressing another very important need, saying that we are tired of the industry saying that the university is too theoretical, the professors are functioning in an ivory tower, so that let's feed into that gap. Yeah, let's foster a better relationship between the university and the industry. So this is an example of what they did to me the first day when I showed up. They put me in front of 900 people twice on day number one. So I remember turning around and I was like, oh, that's me. Yeah, but that was actually a very interesting experience, because they were not just focusing on what I do at the University of Florida, they were interested in the whole person. They were like, tell us, will this work in Kenya? How about Tanzania? Tell us about England. And even though I showed up for entrepreneurship, they were also asking me about construction. Yeah, and in subsequent years, this year, I went back for construction-related stuff. Yeah, so I like that about them. And then another recent experience was the time I spent doing science, technology, and working at the intersection of science, technology, and foreign policy. This was in DC. I really didn't even know anything about the program. I was at an embassy in DC making a presentation. Somebody who used to be my NSM program manager told me, you're applying for the Jefferson Fellowship. I was like, really? And she said, yes. I said, okay. The more I learned about the program, the more excited I was. I was like, okay, they only select 15 people every year. I want in. And if I'm doing this, I have to do it right. I can talk to you about the strategies I used to get in. It worked. One of the things that I felt was a fortunate occurrence, I ended up having my placement in the Global Development Lab. So I was in a program that's run 100% by the Department of State, but I was placed within the Global Development Lab in USAID. And the lab, I like to think of it as a combination of people from the Silicon Valley, people from the university, and politicians. Yeah, there has to be fireworks there. Yeah, the three groups of people don't really see the world from a right place. So this pretty much summarizes everything we were trying to do in the lab, as we called it. Yeah, so we said we have big problems, we are not afraid, we are very bold. We are going to take on these big problems, complex problems, complicated problems that have got a lot of interdependencies. We know we cannot do it alone, so we are opening the door up to anybody who wants to talk to us. If you have an idea, we don't care if you are in rural Argentina, we don't care if you're in state college, just talk to us. We'll take your idea through this funnel. Yeah, and if it works, we'll help you roll it out into application in the real world. So we had four main pillars. Science, so again, just reinforcing the fact that there is always a place for basic science in solutions that address our most pressing societal challenges. Technology, innovation, partnerships. Yeah, we can't do it alone. So the government was kind of nicely placed to do this sort of thing because they have convening power. They have a lot of dealings. Some of them have got big dollars assigned to them. So they can use this, to negotiate deals that encourage people to work in a more collaborative manner. Yeah, so that's another visual explaining what the goal was at the lab. Business plus community sector organizations, non-profits, public sector, organizations. So this was another, fortunate occurrence that when I went to DC, I had no expectations of doing anything construction related. But guess what? I ended up having a construction related project because USAID does in fact fund a lot of construction projects all over the world. Yeah. So I just use this as an example because even to USAID, they didn't know until about 2014 that the volume of work that is construction related, that is buried in budgets for programs such as food security, health, etc., in 1 year, 2014, it amounted to $5.6 billion. Yeah, that's how huge it was. So I got involved in this one example of a project that was being done in Ethiopia, construction embedded within health, actually HIV, AIDS, PEPFAR. And I just use this as an example because it shows that when they took on an initiative, they were always taking it on large scale. It's not one hospital, it's a system of hospitals that needed to be constructed. So I've also talked about this, that the bucket was huge, 5.6 million. A lot of the money is deployed into the embassies, into the missions, the USAID missions, like USAID Manila, or USAID Nairobi, or USAID Ethiopia, A very small fraction stays in DC. So that got me very excited. I got into lots of conversation with people from Bureau of Food Security, and they shared with me that some of the things that frustrate them that can be, they're actually saying, we don't want to talk to you about what we're doing. We want to talk about what you are doing, because there are some opportunities that can be addressed if scientists and engineers in your field took on those challenges, e.g. post-harvest loss. So I had actually recently a group of students focusing on that, and I put this here because there is a story behind the story. And if you don't know the story behind the story, it's very easy to underestimate what the students were focusing on. Post-harvest loss is huge. We can talk about that separately if you're interested. So I put that, so I'm excited. I have a new project, that requires me to talk to people outside my profession. Bricks for food security, And then this was another example of the time I spent in DC. I gave you one example in Manila where they had acknowledged that if we are doing things in a country, if we want to do it at large scale, or if our goal is ultimately doing it at a large scale level, we need to partner with the local institutions. And many times the barrier to doing that is saying, they don't have lab equipment, etc. One of the units I was placed with in DC was focusing 100% on strengthening the research ecosystem for the universities. So I came up with some solutions on things that they can do to go big with this. So I was trying to encourage them to shift away from funding programs that are pushing technology into this industry to things which are responding to direct needs and I had data to back up my position. I used Kenya as a case study because I'm familiar with it. So I can talk to you about this. I gave them examples, very specific examples of 3 routes through which they can grow an ecosystem for the university-based researchers. And then I also mentioned spending time in the Bureau for Food Security. I was pulled in for the data stuff that I do. So the team was looking at, using big data, using drones, using anything IT related that's current and, in fashion to address food security problems. So again, the question they gave me, how can we fully engage with data-driven innovation? And this is what they were trying to avoid, that a few years ago in Uganda, the Ministry of Health shut down everything that was being done by foreign entities because there were too many applications being pushed out into the systems, into the country, into the healthcare system. They don't talk to each other. They spend so much money trying to get data to move from one application to another. So my team was mindful of this. So I gave them a solution. I'll just highlight example at the very high level that my solution was embedded in having partnerships with the university, the government, and the industry. And I can talk to you about this as well, that I showed them examples of how to do this in Kenya, or how to do this in Tanzania, or how to do this in the Philippines, like having specific names of strategic partners that we can go with. So now, in conclusion, as I begin to conclude, maybe I should say that, I would like to have a second chance to have a conversation with the guy at the National Science Foundation, I have big problems, I have complicated problems, I have complex problems that I cannot solve alone. Nobody can leave the island. If they leave the island, I'm going to fall apart. The projects will also fall apart. So I'm still confident that we have answers to the questions that we have not, we are dealing with, the issues we're dealing with. We have answers. So that's good. The only problem is they don't work everywhere. I'm very confident that through continuous innovation, but also trying to leapfrog certain things, disrupt things, I said my colleagues and I are looking at the brick industry. How can we disrupt it? We can start to take advantage of the opportunities that exist and come up with answers. So my value proposition is, we need to go big with this. We need a diverse group of stakeholders. We need different use cases, meaning one person cannot do this. We need several people doing things in a related manner. So these are some of the examples. I'll just highlight the pictures. So we are doing this in brick making, the fired bricks. We are not going to get rid of them anytime soon. So I'm saying if you can't beat them, join them, Try to make the process a little more efficient, Try to reduce the fuel consumption, reduce the waste. We are looking at things that also are hidden in construction, e.g. injuries. Why not shift the focus on injury prevention? How can we use smart technology to learn things about how certain conditions develop as they are developing so that we can stop spending this much money on injury prevention, on injuries after they've occurred. $15 billion US. I'm also doing some work related to malaria and buildings. Why not malaria? Why malaria? Because as a kid growing up, I got malaria pretty much like once every month. And I was excited when some conversations with people in global health made me realize that what they are doing is actually conflicting with some of the things that we are doing in the built environment, and some of the things we are doing in the built environment conflict with things which they are doing. I've had a student look at this for 6 months, and he came up, with all these instances of conflict, where the efforts are being impeded because the two different professions are not working closely together. And this is something new also. There's a part of Kenya where my parents retired to. They grow peanuts. We call them groundnuts. And for the longest time, my mom retired, and my mom and dad retired, and they live there. And for the longest time, my mom has been telling me, do something for here. And I'm like, I don't know. And then I had a aha moment. I was like, peanuts. There's a lot of effort. I learned this when I was in DC, trying to encourage the peasant farmers in this area to grow crops, different crops, new crops that will empower them economically. And I was like, why are we doing that? Peanuts, groundnuts as they call them, that's a cash crop. So we are trying to disrupt the value chain for the groundnuts, and I'm working with a team of people who are doing plant genetics, I'm there supporting them because I'm their contact to the peanut farmer. farmers, yeah, but I also have other things that I can bring to the table, including building materials. The peanut shell currently is just being discarded as waste. So we have a challenge of trying to set up a way of doing low-cost, low-tech production of things like roofing, sorry, not roofing, but ceiling boards. And then this is a final example. It's a new initiative as well that we are doing in collaboration with Penn State, New Kensington. I see Professor Memari, he's my partner in this, helping me to embed building material research in this. Why do they care about building materials? Everything that they are trying to do right now predicates on them repairing a set of buildings. They do not have a budget to do the conventional roofing, so to explore conventional roofing solutions. Yeah, so they are looking at ways of possibly coming up with a new material, a new roofing material, or a new way of using existing materials or existing composites. And then this is the final slide. So another way that we are trying to promote translation and movement of ideas, both translating and reverse translation, is through the Penn State Global Program. This is a slide from an initiative that I took recently in July. It was a project that the Vice Provost was doing, and we used Nairobi as a test case. So the theory that I've been talking about consistently, we were able to prove it, that there are certain people on the ground who are hungry for collaborators. Yeah, they have problems, they've clearly identified the problems, but they've also clearly identified, you know, things which they cannot do. They're like, we can do this, but we cannot do this. Can you do this? Yeah, those are good conversations to have. So in conclusion, this is the last slide, promise. Yeah, after all this, I think the best strategy is really to approach whatever it is you're working on with the assumption or with the understanding that the difference is significant. It has affected me in so many ways. My journey would be very different if I had overlooked the differences. I would not be here today. I would still be in Florida crushing bricks with my students. Yeah. You know, some of the fun things I wanted to include, you know, I showed up for a class that said salsa in Nairobi, assuming it was salsa aerobics. It turned out it was salsa, the real deal, ballroom salsa. And I thought, I'm a good dancer. I can take this on. No. The difference, yeah, the things that I dance, I'm very good at. The ballroom salsa, that was another thing, yeah. I did not run away, but I learned that the very first step was spending time with the instructor. I paid for extra hours, and I had to unlearn, yeah, everything I learned in freestyle dancing, you know, so things like, you know, he's telling me, don't do that, you're leading me, and I'm like, you know, oh, and like, what is wrong with that? Like, you're the woman never leads, you know, so I'm like, I don't like this, but I stuck with it, and then the other one was when I was in the month before I left Gainesville, somehow this group of people from my church convinced me to sign up for a charity, you know, race. I thought, okay, I'll do that. And then 3 weeks before the race, I woke up, I was like, wait a minute, I'm a Kenyan. The reputation of my entire country is resting on my shoulders. So because I was in the US, and by default, I think about distance in units like feet and miles, etc. I trained for 5 miles. Come the day of the race, I discovered it was 5K. Yeah, the difference was significant. The difference was so huge that I finished in the leading pack. Yeah. Final example again. So when I was in Florida, I enjoyed for 10 years going out to the school system to talk to the young kids about different things. Sometimes science project, but the most fun one was, you know, when they tell me, come and talk about Kenya. I'm like, okay, thanks. So I would show up each time, and then, you know, I don't assume that the story which I told last year or last semester is going to be applicable. So I just show up, they touch me, they ask me, can we touch you? I say, yes, touch me. And the questions they were asking were never the same. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge the contribution of all the different organizations I've listed there, including Penn State, National Science Foundation, Philadelphia, University of Florida, and I want to thank you also for bearing with me.
So much. Quick reminder before we move to questions that everything food-wise is compostable. So we have some compost bins over there and one compost bin back here. So just please dispose of it as you see fit. Now we'll open the floor for some questions. If you'd like to pick questions as you go, you're more than welcome to. So.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very good. I was hoping you'd have some feedback on the tenure structure and the promotion structure at research universities being so heavily based on publication, and the expectation that these publications will just end up being seen by the right people, and how oftentimes the influencers and decision makers never see those publications. Is there something that we can do at the university to change that culture, or how can we better ensure that our research is getting in front of the right people?
Thank you. So I take it you're talking about the research being applied?
Yeah,
the research,
exactly.
Yes. So the examples I was sharing, I was actually trying to show this, that the projects that I've worked in, because they were driven either largely or partly by people who had problems, yeah, we are seeing some of the findings being implemented in the solutions that they're considering. Yeah, so I think the trick is, going back to what I said about the finishing fourth in the Olympics with that sustainability research network proposal. If you have a problem and you can solve it on your own, then that's at least the way I see it. Then you know that it's probably not going to find real life application. If you cannot solve it alone, then there is a probability that somebody else is looking at it and somebody else needs that question answered. Yeah, so my simple answer is, step back from what you're doing and ask bigger questions, yeah, that you cannot answer alone. So the reason why I went more than half an hour was to answer your questions before you ask them. I'm joking.
You had a slide where about something we're doing in Nairobi, and I noticed that there are at least 4 Penn staters, and it seems to me that you said if the workshop supported your model. It seems to me that your model is not easily repeatable, because if you went to Venezuela, would you have 4 Penn staters?
Okay.
Naturally, as part of your team?
All right. So yeah, that is true, that we ended up being very lucky that the lady who's sitting in the middle was at that time the cabinet secretary for environment, and she used to be a professor here. And the gentleman next to her was actually in setup engineering design. And then, yeah, the vice provost and me. Part of it was planned, part of it was not planned. Part of it we got lucky. That our file or our letter ended on the desk of a professor who had strong affiliations with Penn State. But then notice the title of my slide. It says strategic initiatives. So remember when I talked about this dancing experience and how this person told me, you're a woman, you can never lead. So one of the questions I asked him was, what if the guy cannot dance and I have very good moves? And he asked me, why are you dancing with him? Yeah. So it's a similar thing. If you want to replicate this model, you cannot dance with absolutely anyone. Yeah, you have to be very strategic. You have to be very purposeful. And we had to raise the stakes really high. So more than just Penn State, we had people in the room who were fully engaged. And I told my collaborator that, up front, that I know that there are people who show up with an expectation of a per diem. So one of the things I said, if anybody asks for a per diem, take their name off the list. Yeah, you have to be selective. Even if you don't find a Penn Stater, you have to be selective. Another thing that we were doing, it's subtle, it's implied. I'm a Kenyan. Yeah, remember I talked about the field dev and how they were leveraging on the diaspora. Yeah, we have a big population of people from every country. Yeah, even here on campus. Use them. They know people who know people. Yeah, I tell my students I can talk confidently about Kenya and Tanzania. We are big on relationships. Yeah, who you know is more important than what you know. And I ask them, how do you know this person? Have you worked with them before? How did they perform? So don't dance with just anybody. Missouri.
I was actually in Kenya myself earlier this year, working on some environmental programs as well through part of my organization. I was curious with that, I forget which slide it was that it talked about disrupt, develop, innovate, mainstream was the last. what were some of the strategies that you've taken in your career or with some of these programs to communicate these issues either in Kenya, in the US, to the mainstream public for them to better understand them and get inspired by these solutions, these collaborative cross-industry solutions?
All right, thank you. So one of the things we do, or my collaborators have done a lot, is bring people in a room. We call this one the convening. Like you bring a good diverse group of people in a room and you get them talking. And chances are 9 out of 10, if you're very good at selecting the profile, it doesn't have to be the person, but the profile. Like in this case, I gave a list of specifications. So similar to like, people who go on a first date and then they have a list. Do you do this? Do you do this? Yeah, that's what I did. I had a profile of, the sort of people who needed to be in the room, and I was partly addressing the question that you are asking. I wanted people who, when they leave, they are going to talk to people who will want to hear what they have to say. Yeah, so workshops, convenings, they've been very good at that, but you should not just do a workshop or a convening for the sake of doing that. I had a very specific reason for wanting to do this. For the longest time when I've been working in the US, I've had people say repeatedly, if you want to do anything in Kenya, avoid Nairobi. I'm like, I'm a Nairobi girl. Yeah, and I was trying to prove that if you're talking to the right people, you don't need to avoid Nairobi. Yeah. So I use a lot of my collaborators and their network to get the word out, yeah, and the response so far has been positive. And then secondly, just acknowledging that you cannot do this alone. Yeah, one person cannot be responsible for disseminating all the research related to sustainable structural materials out into the world. That will not happen. So relying on a network of people. So our model for the Sustainability Research Network was actually a very good model. They loved it. What they did not love was the fact that we can vote out the social scientists. We can vote them off the island. That's what they did not like. So people, human resource, social capital. Human resource meaning, if you go to a country, partner with the institutions, the higher education institutions, the tertiary institutions. Social capital, ask people to bring their network. See his hand.
I like the metaphor that you started with. The people in the academy are brick makers, and obviously you're not.
I am, but I'm not.
Yeah, well, look forward to what those bricks are going to be used for. You might have something to do with, the construction, right, to extend the metaphor. A lot of people in the university system are very comfortable being brick makers. Right? It's a system that works for them. They can make a nice life for themselves and enhance their reputation. And this goes back to part of your question about tenure. What would you say to people who are comfortable simply being brick makers to get them to have an awakening like you had, like we all need to have, so that we can all get on board with solving these bigger problems that we're all dealing with?
I think we're going to have to, for that, we have to invest in a motivational speaker. So I think, on a serious note, as you're asking, you're saying that's actually a very difficult question to answer because it involves the social thing. So that's another thing for me to add on to my list of talking points for the NSF manager, that there's the human component, and it's very difficult to deal with that. I come from a professional background where that is not my area of expertise, so I would have to work with people who understand change management. Yeah, I would say let's rely on them. I remember during my early days working in the business improvement department in England, right after my PhD, I noticed that we used to bring consultants. When the company is trying to do something, they would actually invest money in consultants. And a lot of it was not because we don't have anybody in-house who cannot do this thing, but the consultants who we were bringing in were very good at selling things. Yeah, so they would come and they create energy and everybody's so excited, we're doing this. And then when the energy level starts to drop, we're like, let's have another consultant come to help us. Yeah, yeah. So I'm using, but they were doing it for a very specific reason, because they were realizing that what we are trying to do is actually change management. Yeah, there are some people who do it naturally, but for most of us, we don't. Yeah, when things get on the human side, sometimes I jokingly say, I'm Commonwealth. I don't do emotions in the workplace. Yeah, so when people are like, we don't like this, I'm like, okay, those are emotions. Yeah, yeah. So I would just say, yes, this is something that we have to acknowledge. People in my profession, we have to acknowledge. We don't do that very well. We need to work with people who understand what motivates people, what gets them excited. Yeah, what got me excited was the realization that, I have 2 passports. Yeah, so I can do something in this space that, I straddle the US and Kenya. I liked it. Yeah, otherwise, as I said, if I hadn't focused on the difference, that I'm in the US, but I'm different. And when I'm in Kenya, I'm different. If I hadn't focused on that, I would be crushing bricks and writing papers about bricks.
Do you think in the next few months there will be a huge paradigm shift, especially in an island like Barbuda, where they will be completely redoing everything to change their system and everything? So it seems to me that will be a huge opportunity to a laboratory, if you will, for technical change and construction, kinds of construction.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. I don't have an answer, to be honest. She asked about the future. The last time I tried to predict what was going to happen tomorrow, I got it wrong. So my guess is as good as yours. But what I think there is an opportunity, but it depends on how we play it. So if it's people in my field, construction, I know from when we had the problem in Haiti following the big earthquake, I was in a workshop which was just about that. They were trying to think, how can we use this as an opportunity to promote sustainable structural materials? And there were some recommendations from that workshop. There were several other workshops that were focusing on that. Unfortunately, the final decision on what gets funded is not just about what the construction people are saying. There are some other things, some socio-political factors that are out of our control. So the best we can do, people in my profession and I, the best that we can do is to put the proposal forward. That's similar to the role I played in DC. Did I go to DC thinking that I'm going to change the mind of the Secretary of State? No. But at least, the team that I was part of, we were there to be the voice of thoughtful critique. Yeah, so we questioned very gently what you're doing and give you alternatives. You might want to consider this, you might want to consider this, but we understand that there are some other things involved, geopolitics and what the people of Bermuda want, and we have to take that into account. Those who are left.
I can just project.
Okay.
The question I was going to ask was, you talked a lot about partnerships and strategy and stuff like that. For young students, what can we be doing, like Sustainable Development Goal number 17 is partnerships for the goals. How can we promote that for students in the higher education system?
So are you a student?
Yes.
I think my simple approach, my recommendation is to just start with something very simple. Like, I was very happy to be known at the University of Florida as the brick lady. Yeah, so it gets the conversation started because, why are you the brick lady? Yeah, so just do something, start small, do something, and if it's something which is working, people will have a name for you, or they'll have a name for what you're doing. I had people, make all sorts of comments like, oh, your bricks need a haircut. So I was like, it's interesting you'd say that, and we'd have a conversation about that and say, this brick was the means through which we understood what fiber dispersion means. Yeah, that the fibers are sticking out. Yeah, so do something, and as you're doing something, like, don't be afraid to make your hands dirty. In construction, a lot of what we do is outdoors, it's very visible. Don't be afraid to fail. Yeah, and when you fail, if something doesn't work the way you thought it was going to work, be open to having conversations about that.
We have time for one more question if there's anyone else. Otherwise, we can just open the floor back up to mingling and networking and stuff. All right, great. Well,
thank you so much for coming.